So it's that time to do another top 10 of the year. And just to preference what this list is about, it means the movies that I watched for the very first time, beginning from January 1st, 2021 to December 31st, 2021. I kept track of every single movie that I watched for the very first time, and it doesn't matter if the movie was released in the past years, this year, as long as it was a first time watch for me. But first, the honorable mentions. Straight Time was a movie that I've had on my list forever. And it wasn't until for some reason, I got into this crime kick and I was like, I'm going to finally do it. And I did it. And it's fantastic. Going in Style is a movie that I randomly came across. I had actually heard about it from the remake that came out just a couple of years ago. And what intrigued me about it was just the cast and the whole concept of it. And so I started it, and it was not entirely what I was expecting. It goes from being a comedy to a drama throughout the entire runtime, and it just transitions between these two tones perfectly. Even the comedy elements definitely does have that slight sadness to it. And it's this odd combination of just combining drama with comedy. And it's something that I really haven't seen in a long time. Pig came out this year. I've heard nothing but great things about it. I watched it. At first, when it ended, I sat there thinking, you know what, I like that. That was a good movie. But ever since I watched it, I just keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And the fact that it plays with genre conventions on what you typically expect for something like this, and it does something that is completely refreshing and something that I was totally satisfied when it ended. The Danish version of The Guilty, and I have yet to see the remake yet, but this movie goes in some very dark places that I was not expecting at all. It keeps you engaged throughout the entire time. The whole thing plays out in real time, and now it just makes me curious to see what the American remake did in terms of, what it kept the same and what elements it changed. So that's something that I might check out. But as of right now, The Guilty was fantastic. The Long Good Friday. Oh my God, I love this movie. I've wanted to see this movie for years. Bob Hoskins is one of my favorite actors. I love just him as an actor. Everything from Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which I think he's honestly brilliant in that movie. I really think that is possibly one of the best performances ever. Just given the fact of everything that he has to work with and the fact that he is able to pull off a New York accent. And when you watch The Long Good Friday, you really do realize that because he has got a thick British accent, and he is just amazing in this movie. And the ending, oh my gosh. If you know movies, you probably know this ending, but it's one to hear about it. It's another to sit down throughout the entire movie and watch it play out and then get to that ending, because that ending is one of the best endings I've ever seen and one of the best moments of acting. The Severed Arm is a movie that I never would have thought that I'd be talking about on this type of video, but it really did exceed expectations. It's bonkers in some parts. The beginning of it, where you have these people trapped in a cave and they have to decide, who is gonna lend possibly their arm to survive, and it just gets insane. But then it becomes kind of a proto slasher, and it does it really well. It really does create this really good atmosphere, especially in this scene that takes place in this radio building, and you have this guy in this sound booth, and it gets really, really creepy in that moment. That's the moment that I probably think of the most when I think of this movie. I've heard mixed things. Either people really don't like it or people love it. And I'm on the side that I loved it. And the last movie that I want to mention on my honorable mentions is Sudden Fury. This was one of the first movies that I watched, and it was not expecting the level of quality from this movie and just how bleak it gets in the ending. I figured I would at least mention it here. If you haven't checked out Sudden Fury, give it a shot. It's definitely something interesting, and it seems like it's an undiscovered gem from the 70s. Now let's get to the official list. Number 10, The Silent Partner. Given the fact that this is close to Christmas, I feel like this is one of those hidden gem Christmas movies that nobody talks about. The movie stars Elliot Gould, and he plays a bank teller in a shopping mall bank. And he discovers that the bank is going to be robbed in the next day. And he has a sneaking suspicion that it's the mall Santa Claus. And he's able to take some of the money that he knows is going to be stolen. So then the robbery happens, and the robbing Santa Claus makes off with some of the money. Elliot Gould's character is able to get off scot-free, but the robber, played by Christopher Plummer, eventually finds out that he was skimmed from getting all of the money, and he begins to stalk and play games with Elliot Gould. This movie is a great thriller. It's got elements of dark comedy, truly disturbing scenes. There's one scene in particular that I was shocked that it happened because it comes out of nowhere, and it's a very, very, very violent scene. Christopher Plummer is just so scary in this movie, and it's great. This is a movie that I think is a fantastic Christmas movie, and it'll definitely be one that I return to multiple times.
One night when you come home, you'll find me on the inside, and that'll be the night you'll wish you'd never been born.
Number 9, Hit the Ice. This is one of the earlier efforts of Abbott and Costello, and I've always been a lifelong fan of Abbott and Costello movies. In fact, I remember getting that huge DVD box set, the one that looked like a suitcase. And I've slowly, over the years, just been savoring every single one of their movies that I haven't seen. And for some reason, I always associate watching Abbott and Costello movies around Christmas time for some odd reason. So for this year, I chose to go with one that was snow themed. So I chose Hit the Ice. I feel it's one of their best movies. I really do. And the whole plot is Abbott and Costello play a pair of photographers who unknowingly photograph and kind of participate in a bank robbery. So not only are they framed for the crime, the actual bank robbers are after them. And so what they do is they retreat to this mountainside hotel resort. And that's where a lot of just the wacky hijinks happens and everything. I just have a smile every single time I think about it. And it's short. I could see myself rewatching it. And it's not really a movie that a lot of Abbott and Costello fans really talk about. And, I'm not sure what the consensus is. This may not be one of their best efforts, among fans of theirs. But to me, it just was exactly what I was looking for. Number 8, A Matter of Life and Death. Powell and Pressburger movies have been an area that I've always wanted to cross off of my list. The Red Shoes, the Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, Black Narcissus, all of these I haven't seen yet. And by chance, I decided to start with A Matter of Life and Death. And this movie just does not look at all like it is from 1946 at all. It is leaps and bounds ahead of its time in terms of just the visuals and just the use of color. And another movie that I watched around the same time was the Ernst Lubitsch film Heaven Can Wait. This is another movie that is a Technicolor film, and given the fact that they're around the same time, just the colors in A Matter of Life and Death are just incredibly rich, and absolutely stunning. I mean, just the opening sequence of when David Niven's character is talking to the radio operator in the very opening of the film. Just the use of colors in the plane crashing sequence is, and it's just insane. It is insane. And throughout the entire movie, just I was completely glued to the screen. You know, for anybody that hasn't heard about this, the basic premise is a British airman in World War II. At the very beginning of the film, his plane is going down, and he is on the radio with an American radio operator, played by Kim Hunter. And they strike up this connection. And right before he bails out of the plane, they fall in love with each other over the radio. And miraculously, he survives. And what it turns out to be is that there was essentially a technical error on the other side. And so everybody's waiting for David Niven's character to show up to basically limbo. And he basically has to prove that he belongs on Earth, that he has the right to still live. It goes in directions that just make you sit back and just take it in, because especially the third act, which basically becomes a courtroom scene, but in the afterlife. And just again, to say that the visuals in this movie are amazing is just, everybody that has seen their movies will say that, but I mean, it's a fact. I mean, their movies are just nothing I've ever seen before. So if this movie's on your radar, watch list, or whatever, I would strongly urge you to finally put it on and see for yourself.
You are determined to get me into this salad.
And what about the salad you got me into?
Now look here. You don't want me to use force, do you?
Number 7, L'Argent. Now, this is a movie by Robert Bresson. In fact, it's his final movie. And my exposure to him beforehand was I had only seen A Man Escaped. And that is a movie that I've been meaning to go back into again, because it's probably one of the most simplistic movies I've ever seen, where the sole focus is on him escaping, and it's got no fat whatsoever. And I would say L'Argent is very similar, just because of the fact that it's always focused on the forward momentum of its core idea. It basically plays out like a series of events that lead one into the other, and it's all kicked off with a forged bill. And so you follow this bill in the very beginning of the movie, and you see how it's passed around from one person to the next, and how it starts off as this harmless just con, and how it has this huge effect on this one person. And just the crazy thing is that the links that this movie goes to and where this character goes to, it wasn't until the very ending when it really clicked with me. In fact, that there's a couple images towards the end that I just immediately think of whenever I think of this movie. And, if you've seen this movie, then you probably know, what I'm talking about. The interesting thing, and this is definitely something that it took me getting used to a little bit, every single one of the actors is extremely wooden. They don't show any emotion in terms of them committing a crime or something very tragic happening to them. There's only one moment of actual emotion, but it's very quick. The fact that this is, that this happens throughout the entire movie, it's definitely a choice. It's not, something where, these aren't, good actors or anything like that. But I really think that this is definitely a choice. At first, it was something that I had a hard time getting used to, but once you are along for the ride, you really start to kind of fall into appreciating it and kind of just understanding what he was going with in terms of just this choice, because it's definitely a choice, and it's definitely a risky choice. And in the end, I feel it really does pack that punch that I feel that ending really needed. And it's one that I've just continued to think about and think about and think about. It's definitely a clear-cut example of a movie where this one small incident has this ripple effect, and where it affects multiple characters and everything. And I love those types of movies, and this one fits perfectly into it. Number 6, The Fortune Cookie by Billy Wilder. This is the first pairing of Walter Matthau and Jack Lemmon. And it was interesting to see just the beginning of just their relationship when it comes to just comedy in general. The way I was introduced to them was through The Odd Couple. And that's a movie that I've just continually gone back to, and I love it. Their chemistry in it is just fantastic. And I've always heard about this movie, given the fact that it's, with Billy Wilder, and him and Jack Lemmon have some past films together like The Apartment, and it's the starting ground for Walter Matthau. It's your classic kind of con movie where you have these two characters. One is just this conniving and very sleazy character played by Walter Matthau. And this is one of the most perfectly cast roles I've seen because he just relishes everything. And you just know that he's just such a scumbag. And you just love watching him. And I mean, the basic premise is, Jack Lemmon's character is a camera operator during a football game, and he's accidentally injured. And his brother-in-law, played by Walter Matthau, is what they call an ambulance chasing lawyer. So he hatches this whole scheme of convincing Jack Lemmon's character to basically act like the injury was a lot worse than what it was. That way they can get a lot of money out of it. The bulk of the movie is just them trying to hide this big lie that they've kind of dug themselves into. Right off the bat, it's a good comedy premise, and it offers both Jack Lemmon and Walter Matthau to really display why they were great. But what propels this movie beyond just a comedy is the effect that it has on the football character in the movie, and just how it really does affect him, and how guilty he feels for thinking that he injured Jack Lemmon's character and everything. So that's one thing. But the other thing is just the arc of Jack Lemmon's character is fantastic. And again, going back to the ending with all these movies, I've been noticing a pattern where a lot of these movies really stick the landing, and that's what I feel is one of the most important aspects to a movie, is being able to stick that landing. Those two combinations of having this comedy but mixing in this really good message really does propel this movie, and has made it stick with me throughout the entire year.
Interesting case. I'm considering suing the United Fruit Company. There should be a printed warning on every banana peel. Those things can be hazardous to your health. Carry on, gentlemen.
Number 5, To Be or Not to Be by Ernst Lubitsch. Now, earlier on the list, I was talking about how I had recently watched Heaven Can Wait. And at the time of this recording, I actually just finished it. And so I can finally mark off another one of his movies, because this year I wanted to try and watch more of his movies, and To Be or Not to Be was the movie that kind of spurred that idea. So I've watched To Be or Not to Be, The Shop Around the Corner, and now Heaven Can Wait. And between those three, this was my favorite. And it was a movie that I really didn't have any set expectations going into it. I mean, honestly, the only reference point that I had was the 1983 remake starring Mel Brooks. And I remember watching that, when I was younger and everything, and liking it. But this movie really, it just caught me off guard with how it was able to balance so many different tones. I mean, essentially, it starts off as as a wacky, zany comedy, and throwing in some kind of little bit of melodrama with this relationship in the movie, and then it becomes this espionage thriller, and it never does lose touch with the comedy aspect that it had developed in the beginning, and it blends it so well. And when it reaches the second half of the movie, it really does become this really white knuckle, just suspenseful movie that undercuts with all these jokes when it comes to just the characters that it's built up, and it's fantastic. I mean, Jack Benny is amazing in this movie, and Carol Lombard. I mean, like their chemistry is insanely good, and every one of the supporting characters, Robert Stack in this movie is good, and like I said, it has these set pieces throughout the movie that have just stuck with me, and it really does build, like, some of these sequences are really good at dark comedy because of the fact that it really does build this suspense throughout, and you're laughing with how tense it is, but you're laughing at just the whole absurdity of some of the situations. And then you factor in the time period of when this movie was made, and it's a movie that I feel like every time I'm gonna watch it from here on out, there's just these things that I'll just always be thinking about when it's playing, whether that be the performances, the direction, the script, the comedic timing, and then you add in the historical significance of what was going on at the time, and it really does just propel this movie into something masterful.
If I shouldn't come back, I forgive you what happened between you and Sabinski. But if I come back, it's a different matter.
Number 4 is Rock and Roll High School. This is the movie that I had the best overall experience with because the way that I saw it was in theaters in 35 millimeter, and it was fantastic because the theater that I went to, they actually got in contact with the director, Alan Arkush, and he actually filmed this little like introductory like 5-minute segment for the beginning of the movie, and it was like the perfect introduction to the movie, and he only did it for this theater. And I think just the combination of that, and it was kind of a spur of the moment type thing of going to see this in theaters because, you know, I'd heard of it beforehand and everything, but I never really went out of my way to go see it, and I'm shocked that I didn't because of how much fun this movie is. You know, when you see a movie where you've heard is good and you think, yeah, I'll probably like that, but, you know, you keep kind of pushing it off and pushing it off. This is kind of that movie for me. And so it being shown in theaters was, you know, the perfect way to kind of just go for it and watch it. You have just all these different elements. It's kind of the whole spirit of the movie is just fun chaos, and it never gets bogged down in any type of dramatic elements. It has a story, it has a core story. The gags in this movie is fantastic, and the one with Clint Howard, everything with him is just gold, and it was a big surprise because I had no idea that he was even in this movie. And then, you know, it makes, you know, it's a no-brainer because then you realize that, you know, it's a whole Roger Corman production and how he originally wanted to call it Disco High School, and just the script from Joe Dante is amazing. And I had already loved Joe Dante's movies. You know, Gremlins is one of my favorite movies. I really think Looney Tunes Back in Action is highly underrated, and this is just another indicator of just what a fantastic writer and director he is, let alone the director, Alan Arkush, and just how these two people come together and just make this a fantastic movie.
So what do you think of my school, guys?
Boy, when you have recess, you really go all out.
Consider yourselves officially enrolled in Rock and Roll High School. The facilities are yours.
Number 3, Warning Sign. Talk about a movie that I had never heard of before. And the fact that I've never heard of it before just made it so much more impactful when I first watched this. Because I watched this at the very beginning of the year. This was like the second or third new movie that I saw. And my God, did it just blow me away with just where it went. So the premise is it stars Sam Waterston, and in a rare co-lead role, Jeffrey DeMunn. And the premise is, at a government biological weapons laboratory, a deadly bacteria gets loose and the whole building goes on lockdown. And it basically takes place all at this facility, and it shows the quarantine procedures, the people outside trying to get a hold of the situation, and everything that happens as a result of this. Now, the thing that I was not expecting was I went into this just thinking it was just going to be a simple quarantine movie, kind of along the veins of the movie Outbreak. And then it takes a turn halfway through. And that's when it goes from this thriller, and it definitely dips its toe into the horror genre. And it is an amazing twist. and a very creepy one. That the way that they do this twist and where it goes, it's perfect. This was such a huge surprise. You know that type of movie that just you've never heard of before, and it just completely blows you away, and just that first time experience of watching it just can never be topped. This is one of those experiences. And so Sam Waterston and Jeffrey DeMunn are fantastic. This is what really does hold this movie together, because it could really just turn into a very standard horror thriller involving this bacteria. But what really elevates it are the characters. Sam Waterston has a wife who's pregnant who is trapped in the facility when it goes into lockdown. And you really do care about both of them. They have this type of relationship where you really want them both to survive. And then you introduce Jeffrey DeMunn's character, and I wish this guy starred in more stuff because he is fantastic in this movie. Every single scene that he has, it elevates the entire movie. And then you have G.W. Bailey, and you may remember him if you've seen the Police Academy movies. He plays Lieutenant Harris, and I did not know that he was in this, so when he popped up, I'm like, whoa. And so given that this is 1985, this is a year after the first Police Academy movie, so he looks identical to what he does in there. All these amazing character actors just come in and really elevate this movie. I don't understand why this is a movie that's not well known and is up there with some of the best movies of the 80s or just some of the best disaster movies ever. And it's a movie that I will never forget the first time I watched it.
Listen to me, Walston. Back up. Nice and slow. Don't talk to him. And don't run.
Number 2, Harold and Maude. Every movie that I've seen up until this point in my life, this is one of the most emotionally affecting movies I've ever seen. When it comes to a movie that's as famous as Harold and Maude, what else is there to say? I guess the only way to go about talking about it is how did it affect me? The way that this movie can affect somebody can vary from person to person. And I love that. I love the fact that this is a movie that brings out so many different feelings when it comes to the story and character and what a person can take away and what they can gain from an experience like this movie. The characters of Harold and Maude are one of the most unique and interesting characters that I've ever seen in any piece of media. Books, games, movies, and looping back to what I was talking about in terms of how many different ways that this can affect somebody, it's got humor in it that is incredibly dark, extremely funny, and has some of the sweetest and most uplifting scenes that I've ever seen. And it transcends simply from watching a movie to experiencing a movie, being in that world, having it wash over you and truly feel affected by a piece of art, because that's what this movie is. Maude's unique take on life is such an uplifting and positive view that it really was just refreshing. In the same way that when I was talking about Pig, where it goes against the grain in terms of typical movie conventions to become refreshing and really makes you view the art of filmmaking, the art of writing, the art of everything that goes into making a movie, and it makes you view them differently. And this movie did all of those things. It affected my way of viewing characters. It affected my way of how to perceive movies and how to perceive meaning in some of the most smallest lines of dialogue. And the beauty about this movie is this was my experience. Somebody else can come along and have a complete unique and amazing experience. And that right there is what makes this movie go from a watch to an experience.
What is your name?
Harold Chasen.
Oh, how do you do? I'm Dame Marjorie Chardin, but you may call me Maude.
And number 1, Blue Collar. This is it. This is my favorite movie that I've seen out of the entire year. Out of the 180 plus movies that I've seen, this one has stuck with me. It blew me away when I first saw it. It's been such a long time since I've seen a movie where for everything that I like in a movie, and what I want to see and where the story progresses, the direction, the soundtrack, the dialogue, the performances, the turns in this story, everything in this movie just kept topping itself, which is honestly a miracle that this movie is even remotely watchable. Because once you go into the backstory and the behind the scenes stuff that happened on this movie, it is insane. So first off, you have Paul Schrader behind the camera, and this is his directorial debut. Up until this point in 1978, Paul Schrader was known for writing Taxi Driver. And then there's the three leads, Richard Pryor, Harvey Keitel, and Yaphet Kotto. And this is what fueled the behind the scenes stuff. And these three actors basically wanted to kill each other every single time that the cameras stopped filming. There's so many stories that I've read about just the production of Richard Pryor, taking his bodyguards and pinning down Harvey Keitel after Harvey Keitel intentionally messed up a take. And this was just one instance, because apparently this just happened and happened and happened, and a lot of creative choices were made during the movie in terms of framing, having the three actors together on screen. Without that knowledge, it's not noticeable, which is the most insane thing. But having that knowledge of knowing that these three actors are just ready to kill each other and where the story goes, it creates this just amazing viewing experience. And it's even amazing that Paul Schrader even would go on to direct other movies after this, because apparently from his accounts and everything, he had a complete mental breakdown during the production of this movie. I would really recommend listening to the commentary track, and it really goes in depth as to the choices that were made in response to all this behind the scenes drama. But the plot of the movie is three auto factory workers decide to rob their local union headquarters. So going into it, you may expect a heist movie, and that is a part of the movie, but it's very small, and it really does grow from there. Excluding the behind the scenes stuff, the three actors gel so perfectly, especially in the scenes where you can see all three of them on screen. And they play off each other perfect. Richard Pryor, I wish he did more dramatic stuff, because he, especially towards the end, he has got a lot of weight to carry in terms of what happens to his character. Paul Schrader's direction in this movie, it really does seem like, and I mean this in the best way possible, where it seems like he has something to prove. And that's exactly what you get, where it's him proving that he can do this and this is what he wants to do. And that, just the opening credit scene alone just booms onto the screen, and it just caught me, and it just never let go. It creates this energy that lasts throughout the entire movie. And then when you get towards the middle and end of the movie, it really does do a good job at making the audience understand where certain characters are coming from, certain decisions that are made, and it makes you debate on like what's right and what's wrong, and then there is that gray area in the middle. So yeah, if you've wanted to watch this movie, if you've never heard of this movie, this is one of the best movies of the 70s. I mean, I think it's insane that Paul Schrader went from writing Taxi Driver to writing and directing Blue Collar, because he is quickly becoming a director that I really, really admire. I mean, last year he directed a movie that made my list, which was Affliction, and that is also a movie that just kind of came out of nowhere, and I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. So if you've never seen Blue Collar or even heard of it, I would definitely try to make an effort to try to watch it, because this is the type of movie that reinvigorates my love of movies and reminds me why they're so important.
All you got's a bunch of shit. You don't even own it. Can't give it back because it's already broke down.
And that's the list. I hope I pointed out some movies that people might want to check out or add to their watch list. And yeah, I'm working on a new video right now that should be out relatively soon. I have it all recorded and everything, so I'm starting the editing process right now. And yeah, that's it. Happy New Year, everyone.